Hello, welcome back to another episode of Leaders in Conversation with your host, Zwelethu Bashman. I am in the leadership seat with a very insightful and impactful leader in the industry. His name is Zwelethu Bashman. He is the Managing Director of MSD South Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa.
Leaders in Conversation with Nomazibulu Changa.
I want you to be comfortable and relaxed because we are just having a leadership conversation. This is not like an interview. It's just for us to let the viewers know what you're all about, what you have done, the impactful work that you do, your contribution into the corporate South Africa, and just your leadership journey in general, right? I've known Zwelethu, or I've last seen him since 20 years. Has it been 19, 20 years or so? Yes, that's the last time I saw you.
No.
You were a young chappy then. I see now you're married and all.
Married, very married.
Very married.
Very married. I think I've been married for about, what's this, my 13th year now?
13th year?
Yeah.
Okay, it's my 10th year. So you are
Same.
very married.
Double figures.
Double figures, as long as we are reaching double figures.
Good.
Would you say it's an achievement? As other people will say, no, I don't think marriage is an achievement.
Look, I think maintaining relationships generally is an achievement.
It is.
Particularly considering sort of the challenges of the world today, communication, everyone's busy. So I think, the ability to go through all of those hurdles with a person and work through
See it through. Yeah, see it through.
Definitely is an achievement.
It feels like an achievement for me. So I'm definitely celebrating this year.
But just on that, in my defense, you did change your name.
I did, yes, I did.
So I got thrown off by the Nomazibulu part, but
yes.
definitely
So
didn't
when I was in
forget you.
university, I was going by the name of Theo. And when I was redefining myself and going back to my roots, I remembered that, let me go back to my first name that my parents gave me, which means Nomazibulu, and it means firstborn in English. So I thought, my trajectory in life has been all about birthing new things. And I remembered that maybe that's the name. So it's time to embrace it.
Phenomenal.
So meaning Nomazibulu. So I now go by the name of Nomazibulu Changa.
Fantastic.
Welcome to the Leaders in Conversation.
Thank you so much. Thank you for reaching out. It's a huge honor for me. I like having these conversations. I think with modern day technology, you're able to get your messaging out there to as many people as possible. You never know which ideas you might spark in people and energize people into a different path.
I agree with you. And I think it's very important because we normally have these conversations in the boardroom. So it's about time that we take it out of the boardroom because the beneficiaries of this or the people that are hungry for this knowledge are the people that are not sitting in the boardroom. So it's very important for us to have these critical, robust conversations 100%. That will impact other people and see how we've done it or how the path was, crafted and how we can advise them to take similar paths or create their own path.
Couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah. So you grew up in Utrecht,
yeah,
right?
Tinach.
You at Tinach, guys, in the Eastern Cape. Tell me about that journey. I have a picture of Utrecht, but I was very scared while I was staying in Port Elizabeth to go to Utrecht. It had its own dynamics and challenges, and so yeah,
it's got its own personality.
It definitely has its own personality. Talk to me about that.
Sure. Look, it's a small town with its own sort of socio-economic issues. But I think, and I suppose everyone experiences places differently. So I can't say my experience of Etinacha is the same experience that everyone had. We had a very controlled, disciplined upbringing. And I remember, I think I just had my first son. He was probably 3 or 4 years old. And my parents were up here visiting, and he was at creche, and it was like after 1, and my dad said to me, Zwelethu, why upumdana? Like, why is your child not back from school?
Yes.
Child is small. And I said, why do you have a problem with that? Because, with us,
modern working families, yes.
And growing up, I was always at school, had extramural activities at choir, I had this and this and that. And he said something phenomenal to me, and he said, "You don't realize why I did that." And I said, "No, I just figured you wanted us to get involved." He said, "No, I didn't want you to see itinacha during the day." And it was not that there's anything wrong with the space.
But he wanted to cushion you.
Didn't want me to assimilate to some of the behaviors that lead to some of the challenges. So my view on euthanasia and my experience is a very cushioned one. But, you know, we still go back every year. It's where I call home. The church that we grew up in is now named after my dad. So there's a connection,
a legacy
there.
that you guys have to follow suit.
And that's what I call home.
Lovely. And you then went to study at Mio College. How was that experience? And I remember Mio was one of the prestigious schools in the Eastern Cape at the time, and I'm sure it still is. So talk to me about that experience, because most of us like really went to like look at schools in the location. So how was that?
It was a phenomenal experience. I was there from, I don't know this grade conversion. I was there from standard 3 to matric. And I think, you know, getting into a boys' school environment, it
very early on, right?
It builds some and it breaks some.
Okay. What has it built?
I think it's built me generally as a human being. It's a dog-eat-dog environment that mimics society. And so very early on, you kind of learn how to stand up for yourself. You learn how to push back, because if you don't push back, boys being boys, you're going to get swallowed. And I think the most important thing, lifelong friendships. These are people that I was, you know, in the same class with for my entire childhood. And to this day, I'm still in contact and in touch with, you know, the people that I went to school with. Many of them have progressed beyond just being friends to
brotherhood.
It's brotherhood. And so for me, that's the important thing.
What has it broken?
In me?
Or generally, what do you think it could break?
Look, I think particularly in society these days, it's a very patriarchal environment. And so the nuances of representation, the nuances of openness, communication and acceptance, certainly in my time, weren't there. I'm sure it's developed now. I've been out of school now for about 23 odd years. So I'm sure it's changed now, but certainly back then, I can say without a shadow of a doubt that there are people that went into the environment and simply didn't assimilate because they were different.
So what would you say are the values that have shaped you to become the person that you are today?
There's a thing, from a schooling environment or generally? Generally. I think generally the biggest thing that I learned from home is humility and respecting people. And understanding and learning very on in life that you are a vessel of the people or the community that you're in. You can't avoid it as like a preacher's kid, especially living in Mission, because anyone can go there. If people are hungry, they have to go knock and say, you know, we're hungry, can we get something to eat? Black people don't have, you know, money for counseling and psychiatrists. So who's the psychiatrist or psychologist in the community? If people die, to this day, I hate calls in the evening because I knew if the phone rang,
it's someone in the community or in the streets.
Someone is busy dying and Tata has to pack up, go
resuscitate,
give communion.
Yeah.
And so you learn very early on that, you know, you are a vessel of the community that you're in.
Larger community.
And humility. I think humility, the ability to bring yourself down to anyone's level. There shouldn't be a conversation too small for you to have. And understanding that people are different, they've got different challenges. And lending yourself to doing good generally. I think that's the biggest lesson and learning that I've learned.
That's great. That's a beautiful story. So you went on to study at the Nelson Mandela University. You studied, is it biomedical? And technology? What led you to take that decision? I mean, in the olden days, in our era, you would remember that we grew up from an era where you had to be a lawyer, you had to be maybe an accountant, what else? An engineer, doctor, nurse, teacher. So what led you to really go in? Because I never knew about biotechnology when I was doing even matric. So how did you know about this, and what led you to make that decision?
Between you and me, I also didn't know about it. So my dad always wanted a lawyer and a doctor. From a young age, I was always going to study medicine. But I was also quite involved in sports, played rugby, was fortunate enough in my matric year. I made the Eastern Province rugby side. And everything was set for me to go to Wits and do medicine there. And randomly, I think in the last term of schooling, I got a letter from NMMU saying that they were offering me a rugby scholarship. And I really wanted to give the rugby thing a shot. And so kind of spoke to my parents. You know, it was a scholarship, covered everything. I said, listen, let me go do this for 3 to 4 years. If it doesn't pan out, you know, I'll pivot back into medicine. And I actually made the decision to do biomed on the spot. So when I went to meet the sort of
faculty
sporting
administration,
director, etc., I said, listen, I want to do something that would allow me to pivot into medicine if things don't work out. We looked at it and he said, biomed is the thing for you. And that's how I ended up doing it. And
did you fall in love with it while you were doing it?
No, definitely not.
Okay.
Look, I think it tickled my love for biology and healthcare and just understanding disease, etc. But I did my in-service training at Greenacres Hospital and Kyla Clinic. And it was for 6 months, and I was in the hospital environment. I was dealing with, you know, doctors.
Patients, doctors,
not
nurses.
directly with patients, but I was dealing with their samples.
Okay.
So if they take blood for you, etc., I was in the lab. And I was like, no, I could never do this.
That's when you realize actually the doctor thing, it was good that it ran away from you.
I was like, these people are overworked, they're underpaid. It's a highly stressful environment. It's largely thankless. And I think those lessons and learnings have plowed into my perspective and contribution to the healthcare environment now.
How would you define your personality? I remember at school, from the little that I remember you were like a nerd. You were like a very calm, not in a bad way, in a good way, very, very calm. So how would you define your personality? But you had some traits.
Yeah, every now and then.
Yes, those traits that we would always remember. Oh, this is you. Yeah.
Look, I would say I'm a bit of a nerd. I think, you know, you can't choose a career of science and not be a nerd. It kind of, it's a sort of a tool of the trade, if I can put it that way. But very introverted. But over the years, have learned how to come out of my shell, which is a lesson and learning that I think people need to learn very quickly in their lives. You know, you grow up and you're stereotyped into a particular box. You're an extroverted person, you are this, you are that. But in real terms, you're everything. And you just have a preference. And learning how to jump in and out.
I was going to say, learning how to pick up situational. So as and when you require this particular personality, you pick it out, you put it out to the world, and 100%. Kind of finding the balance.
So, but you know, my steady state is that of an introverted person, keeps a close-knit group of friends. Amongst my people, I'm probably one of the biggest sort of jokers and nutheads, but that's within a space I'm comfortable with. And I think I've always kind of been an independent thinker. It used to frustrate my parents. I don't know if it's because I'm a middle child, but I've always kind of been
figured things out on your own.
Figured things out on my own, and always believed that there's nothing really that I can't solve as long as I can put enough brain power to it.
Reminds me of my own personality. Sometimes it irritates me more than anyone else. I'm like, okay, why can't I ask for help?
Yeah.
Because I always feel like I can figure anything out, you know. So you then studied, you've graduated at the Nelson Mandela University. You started working. So how was the transition from being at the university, getting into corporate? Was it exactly as you had envisioned? exactly as you were told, if you were told how corporate is going to look like. So how was the transition and how did you find the balance?
The transition was actually crazy because it was marred with a little bit of family challenges.
Yeah.
So as I mentioned, my dad wanted me to be a doctor. As I got into my final year, I realized that the rugby thing, I enjoyed it, but the numbers simply didn't make sense. And really to be, a rugby player that can sustain the kind of life that I wanted, you needed to play at a national level. That was not going to happen for me. So I had that quiet conversation with myself and said, but you
Okay.
tried.
It's good, let it rest.
Leave it now. But the medicine thing never left my folks. So we'd, with my mom, kind of worked on a process. I was supposed to either go back to Wits or go to Cuba to do my medical qualification. And what I hadn't told them that for the last 6 months of my, educational career, or that stint of it, I'd walked around with a briefcase, and I always had a blazer. And in the briefcase were all my employment documents, etc., etc., etc. Just in case all of these applications that I was doing, someone gave me a call at a time. And I remember I got a random call. I was actually visiting friends who were on campus. Got a random call on a Friday. Someone from some pharmaceutical company or recruitment company said, listen, I came across your CV. I'm in Summerstrand doing interviews. When can you see me? And I said, now.
I'm here now.
So I came, dusted off my blazer that I'd been carrying with me for a couple of months, put it on, went there, had all my documents, had the conversation and landed the job. And this was actually before I graduated.
So it means that you've kind of curated where you wanted to go. You knew.
I was incredibly purposeful around it.
I love that.
Nothing was by mistake.
Nothing was by mistake. Everything was, you had a career strategy.
100%. And so got the job. Was a really, at the time, a decent, well-paying job. It was a sales rep job. So I had to go home, break the news to my parents that, listen, the medicine thing is off. I'm going into work. And my dad was quite upset at me. Back in the day, we were still using effects. The time that he actually said, okay, go do this thing, is when I got my sort of offer and pay slips, etc., faxed home. And he saw it first. So he was like, oh, okay, you could potentially live off this. But, go do it quickly, get the itch out of your system. And then I got in. And once I got into the industry, I found that it sort of hit a sweet spot for me, where I could merge the science part of me, but also my love for the commercial environment. And very quickly started to see that, number one, there was a high degree of underrepresentation of black people within the pharmaceutical space. And for a person with a personality like mine, put me in a space where I'm kind of told that you're there.
You are there. And stay there.
You'll stay there. And also around that time, speaks to representation, I met the CEO actually of the company that I lead now. And he was a black person. So we were sitting in a training room, and in walks this guy, introduces himself. I'm told he's the leader of the company. And I was like, okay. So it's possible.
It's doable.
In
it's
fact,
tangible.
I had lunch with him last year in Nice, and I reminded him of that story. And he was like, oh my God, I remember, it was 96, 97, or 2006 or 2007, not 96.
2006.
2006. He says, I remember walking to the room doing the intro. Were you? That was like I was part of the group of people that was sitting there. And I think the combination of having that aspiration, being passionate about the work that we were doing, and also having very vocal and visible sponsors within the business, kind of worked perfectly for me.
For you, yeah. So you have had a diverse and impactful career trajectory within the pharmaceutical sector, as you have just mentioned, culminating in your current role as a managing director of MSD South Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa. How have your experience in various roles and regions shaped your leadership approach and your commitment to addressing unmet health care needs to the continent?
Yeah, that's a big one. So I think the first thing that I was very purposeful around, I never chased a position. I chased experiences. So
Love that.
I very periodically and consistently, I'm always doing almost like an assessment and an audit of what do I know, what don't I know. And I'll always chase what I do know. So if you look
Sort of
at
a skills assessment on your personal skills assessment, yeah.
And so if you look at my career, it's not just an upward trajectory.
It's
sideways,
yes,
etc. And I did that particularly because I'd always say, I don't know enough about that space.
so it was intentional.
Even leaving South Africa, so I think around about 2016, I left with the family and we lived in Dar es Salaam in Tanzania for about 3 years. And that was a purposeful decision. A lot of people said, listen, at the company that I was at, it's the biggest pharmaceutical company in South Africa. I was, doing incredibly well. Well known, well liked within the business, and there was clear intention to develop me. But I got to a point where I said, I'm not just focused on South Africa. I really want to understand, how does this healthcare thing work on the continent?
Yeah.
Because I'd seen a lot of multinational companies, they'll come in, some leader will go to a conference and they'll speak about Africa as the next frontier, high rates of urbanization, growing levels of, education, blah, 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 blah. Economies are growing, and they'll say, okay, we are going to establish ourselves on the African continent, and they'll open offices in West Africa and East Africa. And as soon as it becomes difficult, they pack up and go.
And they leave.
And so I'd seen in my career numerous iterations of this thing, and I said, it can't be. You've got people get sick, they need medicine. I'm not going to learn that in South Africa. So I want to be there, I want to walk the streets, I want to understand the nuances, I want to understand the cultural implications of the environment on the business, and then come back and build the business. And I think, it was a tough period, but it's done me the world of good.
Yeah.
Currently now, under my cluster, we've got 47 countries.
That's huge.
It's huge and tiring. But what I've appreciated through those experiences and being there, no one can pull the wool over my eyes. Someone's going to say, oh, there's this problem in Uganda. And I'm going to pick up a phone and I'm speak to someone in Uganda that I know personally. I know, the outlets. I used to walk the streets. And so for me, that has always been kind of like the plan with my career, with this overarching vision of saying, it cannot be that in a continent of this many people, we cannot build sustainable pharmaceutical companies and build an industry. And I think what we saw during COVID was, vindicated that thought, because all of a sudden you saw the cracks within the healthcare ecosystem on the continent.
Yeah, you did. So what does biotechnology or biomedical look like? What does it entail? So that as we go into deeper in the healthcare sector, pharmaceutical sector, and some of the intricacies of the sector, we understand what's your role and what that looks like and what has it entailed.
So biomedical technology is effectively pathology. So it's the study of disease, what causes disease and the ability to identify diseases. So for example, you get sick, doctor will take your bloods or take a urine sample or take, a sample of skin. All of that stuff gets sent to a lab. There's people in the deep, dark depths of pathology labs that assess your samples, etc., and then they provide doctors with reports that says this person is suffering from this disease. And then the doctor makes the appropriate treatment choice. So that's what I studied. But I must say, aside from my in-service training, I've never worked in the lab environment.
I was going to ask, that seems to be more technical, right?
Very technical.
And when I looked at your profile, you seem to have occupied quite a number of leadership roles. Was that deliberate or?
Yeah, I purposely got out of the lab environment. It just didn't fit with my personality or my developing personality at the time. And I just really resonated with the commercial side of healthcare and healthcare provision. But certainly the science did help in terms of understanding what it is that we were doing, the greater impact. So yeah, that was deliberate, and I think the choices that I made, I'm quite happy.
Quite happy.
Where we are.
And that's the most important thing.
In the heart of Africa's vibrant business landscape, there is a force driving change, innovation, and growth. Introducing Ziana Group, a beacon of bespoke professional services, pioneering the future of business solutions and technology across the continent. At Ziana Group, we are more than just consultants. We're partners in progress. Our ethos, people-centered, solutions-driven, and technology-inclined. With our cutting-edge AI-powered HR digital technology and a commitment to customer success, we empower organizations to unlock the unlimited potential of their people and optimize operational processes. In a rapidly evolving work landscape where talent is seeking control and new concepts like fractional talent are emerging, Ziana Group stands ready to navigate the challenges and seize the opportunities. Rooted in sub-Saharan Africa with a strong presence across multiple countries including Kenya, Nigeria, Mozambique, and more, Ziana Group is dedicated to driving superior business performance across the region. Join us in shaping the future of African business. Ziana Group, empowering the future of African business.
So your leadership journey has been quite an interesting one, and that has encompassed initiatives to broaden access to initiatives such as healthcare, including voluntary license agreements to expand access to HIV medication. Could you share more about these efforts and the impact that they have had on addressing healthcare challenges in Africa?
Look, access to quality healthcare is a big problem across the continent. It's a topical issue in South Africa now, with NHI, etc. But I think the problem is bigger across the continent, and so one of the reasons that I purposefully got into the space that I'm in is to find sustainable solutions of bringing innovative medicines to the continent, because generally you find innovation reaches people on the continent 10, 15 years later.
Yeah.
And we certainly can't do that. And if you look at the burden of disease across Africa, things like cervical cancer, which are preventable, it's the deadliest cancer in Africa, with a place like Swaziland having the highest prevalence in the world. And so what we really are focused on is patient reach. So our reporting internally and the metrics that we focus on is not just sales and turnover, etc. Is how many people are we reaching. If I look at when I took over in the organization, our reach was probably in the region of about 6 million people on the continent. At the end of last year, we probably were touching about 12 million lives.
Almost double.
Almost double. And that's what we're looking at in terms of building access. And there's a couple of things. Number one, we need to ensure that we've got a sustainable healthcare ecosystem.
What does that look like, a sustainable, healthy, running ecosystem?
It means that, number one, you've got enough healthcare practitioners, doctors and nurses, nuts and bolts of the system. If you're not producing enough, you're going to have a problem.
Of course.
And also, if you are producing enough and you're not able to retain them, because you've got markets like the UK and markets like Saudi and
Cuba
Dubai,
and
which
all
are,
these,
you know,
yeah.
absorbing a lot of our healthcare practitioners. We have to deal with that. And you deal with that by creating a sustainable healthcare ecosystem.
Where does this thing start? Just talk me through in your own opinion, or when you look at the healthcare system in South Africa, where does the problem start? What are the challenges? And in your view, what is it that we can do, all partners within the society, to contribute to making this an effective healthcare system?
There are different sort of input factors. The first one's education.
Yeah.
You have to churn people out of sort of the education system with the requisite qualification and understanding. The second one is infrastructure. And it's whenever I speak to people around NHI, that's one of the biggest gaps that I raise, is that we are talking medicine procurement, but we're not talking about building more healthcare facilities in communities where people reside. For example, if someone is sick and they need to go to Barra or they need to go to Joburg Gen, it's an entire day. And what do people then do? They then choose not to seek healthcare interventions early on, what we call early health seeking behavior. You don't have a culture of early health seeking behavior. Generally what you're going to do, you're going to discover diseases and illnesses
at later
the back
stages,
end, when it's heavy to treat. So the infrastructure aspect is one, and I can tell you what we've done as an organization. There's a local organization called Unjani Clinics, and what they do is they take old containers, refurbish them and build clinics, and they take those clinics, put them in communities. There's a flat fee that's paid, but it's a very minimal, affordable fee that allows you to be, you know, seen by a healthcare practitioner and get, you know, some medicines.
proper healthcare.
It's here where you live, and it's run by nurses. So, you know, the nurse goes through a 2-year sort of training period with the organization, and then that is given to them as their business. So a couple of years ago, maybe 2 or so years ago.
So it's sort of an incubation hub.
An
So you
incubation
incubate and commercialize, help the nurses to commercialize and reach, you know, the previously disadvantaged in those communities.
So ourselves and multiple other pharmaceutical companies contribute to Unjani Clinics to ensure that they can expand. So if you go to Alex, most locations have an Unjani Clinic somewhere. It's usually like in the parking lot of a mall or the taxi rank, in spaces where people, and it's run by the nurses from that community. So people have an affinity
So it's
towards
an
it.
employment creation opportunity as well.
And 100%. And so it's endeavors like that that we think need to be looked at in terms of building and expanding sort of the infrastructure. If, you know, often, and it's a disturbing statistic, you know, we went into COVID with X amount of hospital beds. A lot of the talk was around creating more hospital capacity. We walked out of COVID with less. Walked out, I think, with 2 less hospitals.
Wow.
One got flooded, one had a fire. And so the infrastructure aspect is important. And once you solve the infrastructure aspect, the healthcare practitioner aspect, and this early health seeking behavior aspect, you then are able to free up funds to have real conversations about meaningful procurement for these high cost medicines that are generally for, you know, late stage diseases. I often say to people, my job is actually, it's counterintuitive what I do, because I have to convince policymakers to say, I want you to do things that are going to result in me having less patients. So if you build all of this stuff, me with innovative medicines for cancer, etc., you're going to have a smaller patient pool that you're going to have to treat. And therefore, the budgeting conversation becomes an easier conversation because we don't have an endless pool of money. I think the other thing around the sustainability of the African healthcare ecosystem, you know, there's a lot of talk about Africa being one market, etc., and it will be at a point. It isn't. And currently we are 54 different countries, all of whom have different regulatory processes, different procurement mechanisms, etc. And what we're pushing through the various associations that I represent and work with is to have pooled procurement on the continent. It's difficult.
I think that will probably solve majority of our at least 50% of our problems.
It would.
Because it's Africa is there's too much hierarchy, processes, regulations, and they're not talking to each other.
It would. So if I could speak to one person for the needs of the SADC bloc, one person for the needs of ECOWAS, one person for the needs of the East Africa community, it makes my job so much easier. So 50% of my time is spent advocating for my organization, externally, on the continent.
Yeah.
The other 50% I spend advocating for the continent internally within my organization. And I think we need to bring some simplicity and learn from other markets what other markets do. EU does it all the time, where they have pooled procurement and they buy collectively.
In bulk.
So those, I think, are some of the challenges. But, all of these things start with conversations, and you have to have the resolve to continuously push against a narrative that we know is unsustainable for the continent.
Yeah. That's a big job, right? So how do you integrate the values of intentional and authentic leadership into your role as a managing director?
Sure. So I think what I've learned in the early part of my career.
For more from Leaders in Conversation with Nomazibulo Changa, you can continue listening to the rest of this episode on your audio streaming service app. Our podcast is available on various audio streaming platforms. Details in the description below. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you for watching.